Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sweeney Gray, and this is From the South, the morning news brief from Tell Us Your English. And we start this new edition right now. Thank you for joining us. We begin in Honduras, where the opposition presidential candidate Salvador Nasrallah and the former president Manuel Zelaya have announced more protests to reject the government of Juan Orlando Hernandez starting this Saturday. They also said the opposition alliance remains united.
The opposition alliance against the dictatorship was never dissolved. At this very moment, I'm going to confirm it, that the opposition alliance is more solid than ever. I will take possession of the presidency and Manuel Zelaya will remain as the coordinator of the alliance activities. We're open to dialogue with the government. However, Juan Orlando Hernandez cannot take the lead, and dialogue will require an international mediator. I have called upon our people for our next major mobilization that will take place on January 6th.
Today I would like to know if you're all going to join the opposition bloc against the dictatorship, a bloc between the alliance, the Liberal Party, and the social organizations who would like to join with the opposition alliance. Congress should not swear in Juan Orlando Hernandez on January 27th.
The death toll from a bus that plummeted off a steep cliff near Peru's capital, Lima, on Tuesday has climbed to 48. According to the police, 36 bodies were transferred to the morgue in the town of Chancay, while another 12 bodies were still trapped inside the bus. 6 survivors who are suffering from serious injuries were evacuated to hospitals in cities of Lima, Callao, and Chancay. The bus was carrying some 50 passengers when it crashed into a trailer truck around midday and skidded off the road around 48 kilometers north of Lima in a location known as Pasamayao. Strong rains have flooded the central Bolivian city of Santa Cruz, causing power outages and public transport failures. At least 3 municipalities have been affected by the overflowing of the River Parai. Much public transport was out of service as a result of the floods. A bridge that connects Santa Cruz and the other communities in Porongo collapsed as well. Heavy rains and electrical storms have affected Paraguay's capital city and 7 other municipalities. The intense rain caused flooding in many streets and power outages. According to the Energy Administration Department, technicians are working to repair electrical connection and re-establish power in the affected areas.
De electricidad de ese país indicaron que se encuentran en las calles para evaluar y reparar los daños.
The lower house of Congress in Paraguay has voted to reject President Horacio Cartes' cuts in social spending as public sector workers protest outside the parliament building to demand more money for health and education. Our correspondent in Asunción, Osvaldo Zayas, is at the Congress and sent this update.
Hace unos instantes, la Cámara de Diputados rechazó...
We're in the Paraguayan Congress, where the lower house has just rejected the partial veto by President Horacio Cartes of the public expenditure budget for 2018. We remind you that the president's partial veto means big cuts for sensitive areas like education, health, and the public electricity system. Public sector workers from these services are mobilizing outside the Congress. They want the Senate to discuss the budget and ratify the original version, which was sent to President Cartes without those cuts. We should also point out that Paraguay has the lowest public spending on social services of any country in the region. About 3.7% of GDP is spent on education, much less than the 7% recommended by UNESCO. The public sector workers will continue their mobilization to see what the upper house decides. That's all for the moment. Back to you in the studios.
Lejos del 7% recomendado por UNESCO.
Osvaldo Zayas with that report. The French journalist Ignacio Ramonet has published an article looking back at the 12 victories chalked up by the Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro in 2017. Ramonet says Maduro has been the most unjustly slandered president in Venezuelan history. Among his remarkable successes in the past year, Ramonet singles out the diplomatic defeat of attempts to intervene in Venezuela at the OAS, the restoration of peace after 4 months of violent opposition protests, which left over 120 people dead, and the successful election of a constituent assembly, followed by victories in regional and local elections, and a restarting of dialogue with the opposition in the Dominican Republic. And we have more news in a minute, so stay with us. Welcome back. January 3rd marks the 10-year anniversary of the assassination of Mapuche leader Matias Catrillo, who was killed by police during a demonstration. Catrillo was taking part in a protest to demand the release of Mapuche political prisoners and the recovery of their ancestral lands when he was fatally shot by a police officer. Members of the organization, Coordinadora Araco Mayeco, paid tribute to Matias Catrillo on the anniversary of his assassination.
On
the 10-year anniversary of the death of our comrade Matias Catrillo, a former member of our organizations, I want to send a message and pay tribute to all of our people who, like Matias, are fighting for the recovery of our ancestral lands and the liberation of our people. I want to highlight Matias' revolutionary ideas which made him a martyr of the Mapuche community, especially his commitment of process of recovering our territory. That is what we have been doing since the beginning of the National Liberation Front. He took part in many demonstrations to stop the illegal appropriation of our land, and he will always be remembered for his clear stand in favor of territorial recovery based on the autonomy and the self-determination and liberation of the Mapuche people.
Radio National workers in Argentina are on strike and are holding assemblies against massive layoffs and the reforms by President Mauricio Macri's government. More details in the next report.
Protests due to press workers' layoffs are becoming a regular occurrence in Argentina. At the entrance of Radio Nacional, you can see the indignation and shock on the faces of employees, who were fired and are now denied entrance to the station in the first working day of 2018.
We are living the worst scenario imaginable. Our colleagues were sent a layoff telegram, but they didn't receive it. And when they came for work today, they didn't let them pass.
Por un lado, con mucha angustia y hasta uno se encuentra con compañeros que no participan de la vigilia o que no participan.
There are colleagues that are not participating, but they are on their offices crying because it's a very ugly situation. Yet we're very close because this kind of abuse creates a lot of unity.
The labor reform and the adjustments implemented by Macri's government that left thousands unemployed also affect public workers, and the authorities are refusing to rehire them.
En algún momento denunciamos o venimos denunciando el vaciamiento de la radio pública de las 45.
We have been denouncing massive layoffs in the public radio across 45 national stations. We have so few people that some stations can no longer broadcast on the weekends because they do not have enough operators. This is the destruction of the most important network in Latin America.
180 employees of several digital television stations received the news in the middle of the holidays that their contracts will not be renewed in 2018. There are already over 2,500 journalists fired in the last months, and big media corporations are not shining a light on the difficult time that they're going through.
With
the policies of this government, everywhere we are suffering what the workers' movement have been suffering. And now, increasingly, there are less voices, less freedom of speech.
In the next days, there will be new massive layoffs, which will equate to more than 13% of employees in the public media. Press unions have announced a plan to defend themselves, although in the face of Macri's systematic elimination of their rights and their jobs, the future looks uncertain.
5,000 indigenous people in the south of Mexico are to return to their communities in Chalchihuatán after being forced to flee because of violence. The local council says that the government of Chiapas State, as well as the judicial authorities, must provide guarantees to the residents and assume responsibility for their safety. On October 18th, a native of Chalchihuatán was murdered, causing thousands to flee in fear of aggression from their neighbors in Chinalao. We now move to Palestine, where hundreds of children have been illegally detained by Israeli forces in 2017. And since Trump's announcement of the U.S. decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, that number has gone up dramatically.
According to a report by Defense for Children International, or DCI, in Palestine, 2017 saw over 200 Palestinian children illegally detained by Israel's occupying forces, out of which at least 90% have been victims of some sort of violence during their detention and interrogation. This same report also says that ever since President Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital 2 weeks ago, the number of Palestinian children being detained has increased. Since mid-December, 148 children have been apprehended. Israeli soldiers have also started putting up wanted posters around Palestinian villages in the West Bank that read, "We are the army, be careful. We will catch you if we see you," in an attempt to intimidate young protesters, saying that rock throwers are endangering their safety.
We got very afraid when they put our pictures up. They're threatening us that they will arrest us and they will come and take us from our home.
On December 19th, 16-year-old Ahed Tamimi was forcibly removed from her own home by members of the occupying army. On Monday, she was charged on 12 counts of military criminal charges by an Israeli military court, among them aggravated assault and throwing stones. Ahed is an activist that wants to raise out awareness about human rights violations committed by Israeli occupants in Palestinian territories. Her activism began in 2009 when the main water source of her town of Nabi Saleh was taken away. This increased protests against the Zionist invaders. Ever since, Ahed has been a victim of innumerable attacks and endless abuse, among them the murder of her family members.
As she liked to call herself, as a freedom fighter, or a fighter for the Palestinian issue.
In 2012, the young girl became well known thanks to some images where she brandished a fist in the face of an Israeli soldier. Similarly, in 2015, she bit the hand of an Israeli soldier to free her younger brother. She is considered to be an icon of the resistance against the West Bank occupation thanks to her rebellious attitude and determination.
And we're now joined by Jamal Talab Al-Amla. He's the director of the Palestinian Land Research Center to discuss the effects of recent votes in the Israeli parliament on the peace process. Hello, Mr. Al-Amla. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi to you and for everybody in your country.
Thank you.
In Palestine.
Tell us about the amendment passed by the Israeli parliament this week that increases the number of votes necessary to approve any proposal to hand over part of Jerusalem to Palestine.
Yeah. First of all, let us remember that 2017, it's the 100-year pass after Balfour promise to the Zionism movement from the British in that time. And Mr. Trump, the president of USA, he complete the issue and he talk about Jerusalem, or he raised Jerusalem as a capital of Israel. That meant he complete what the British before 100 years has started in Palestine, to occupy Palestine. They want Palestine without Palestinians. Now, the Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, is a part of the Palestinian land occupied at 1967. When they have this decision in their parliament, that's meant Jerusalem no way to make delegation about it. That's meant that Jerusalem completely with them. And of course, that's illegal and it's against the international law. You know that the UN decisions, it said that East Jerusalem is part of the Palestinian occupied territory, and it should be, it's a part from the West Bank, and it's part of the Palestinian state. That the Israelis parliament decision proved that the Israelis are not a partner of peace, and they don't want to have this two-state solution. They want all Palestine, and they prevent in the future to discuss anything about Palestine. We hope that the UN decisions and the people in the world can make a pressure to Israelis to return back to apply the decisions of the international law and the human law. But the situation now is so difficult, and the Israelis' decision is completely destroy Oslo Agreement.
Mr. Amla, what are the effects of these moves on the peace process, and where does it stand right now?
There is, in the ground, there is no peace process. The Israelis, first of all, in the peace process, which it is start at 1993, they divide the West Bank into 3 zones. Zone A, Zone B, Zone C. Zone C, which it is completely under the Israelis' control, it is about 64% of our land. And it is full of Israeli settlements. There is now about 800 settlements in the West Bank with East Jerusalem. Then the real situation on the ground, there is no peace process. They prevent the Palestinians to make any civilian demonstration. As you show on UTV, they arrest the children, they arrest the girls. They have a law in the parliament to allow to the Israelis court to bring children less than 14 years to the court, and they put them in the jail. That's meant there is no possibility to make peace with this occupation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jamal Talab Al-Amla. We've been talking to Jamal Talab Al-Amla. He is the director of the Palestinian Land Research Center, about Israeli-Palestinian relations. And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Welcome back. Thousands of marchers have joined pro-government rallies across Iran after 6 days of unrest. State television broadcast live pictures of rallies in numerous cities where marchers waved Iranian flags and pictures of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The demonstration follows days of anti-government protests, which have left 21 people dead after clashing with security forces. And Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has made his first statement since the unrest began, saying that Iran's enemies were orchestrating a plot to infiltrate and target the government.
In the events of recent days, the enemies have united and are using all their means, money, weapons, policies, and security services to create problems for the Islamic leadership.
The President of the United States welcomed 2018 with the approval of just 1/3 of U.S. citizens. In the next report, we look at which sectors are rejecting his administration and which are supporting it.
Donald Trump enters the new year as the least popular president in U.S. history, with a 32% approval rating within 346 days of his mandate, according to a study by the pollster Pew.
I think he's corrupt and dishonest, and I disagree with most of his policies.
Clearly has demonstrated over and over again that he has no respect for women. And then, of course, he goes and says he does, but your actions speak louder than your words.
Demonstrations in the country began in 2017, and the majority were against President Trump. According to the latest data registered in September, 83% of the protests were called to oppose policy announcements by the president.
The other reason I'm fighting is we have regimes around the world that are hostile, and Trump's making it worse, like North Korea, like the Middle East. I want those countries to see that he does not represent us.
Only 17% of Latinos approve his administration, and African Americans are the least favorable of him, with only 7% believing he's doing a good job.
I don't support him because I don't think his ideas align with the needs and the wants of the African American community.
And he's just, divided the country. I mean, look what happened in Charlottesville. He didn't even denounce those white supremacists there, and we're just really torn up about it. It's just horrible because I was in the civil rights movement of the 60s in Atlanta with Dr. King, and I mean, I feel like we're going to have to get back out in the streets again to fight.
The majority of his supporters are white Americans over 50 years old.
I want jobs within our country, so I feel like it's more down-to-earth people who want to have him elected, and not those people who are. It's not a bunch of extremists out there that are supporting of him.
The fact is that the White House leader has lost support in every sector of the population during these 346 days of his administration in 2017. Now, it is still to be seen if the trend downwards will continue in this new year.
Now let's have a look at some headlines from across the world.
In India's financial capital, Mumbai, thousands of Dalit who rank lower in the caste system have been protesting against violence in which a 28-year-old man was killed by right-wing groups. Dalit protesters have been blocking traffic and forcing shopping malls to shut down. The protests are expected to intensify and spread to India's capital city, New Delhi. 2 climbers, a Cape Town guide and a Japanese tourist have died on South Africa's famed Table Mountain. A 3rd climber has been injured in a dramatic search and rescue operation. 100 other climbers were trapped for hours on the top of the mountain following the accident. Hundreds of Pakistanis staged a protest in the southern city of Karachi, condemning US President Donald Trump's angry tweet about Pakistan's lies and deceit. In his tweet, Trump has said that US had foolishly given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid in the last 15 years and had been rewarded with nothing but lies and deceit.
This statement of Trump is in fact an insult to Pakistan's role and its cooperation with America. This has always been the attitude of America, that it leaves its friends after its task is accomplished.
US President Donald Trump has boasted that his nuclear button is much bigger and more powerful than North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's. Trump's tweet is the latest contribution to the increasingly personalized fight between the nuclear-armed leaders. Meanwhile, in North Korea, the nation has reopened a hotline to South Korea almost 2 years after it was disabled. A North Korean official announced the hotline's reopening in a televised statement, and South Korea confirmed it had received a call from the North at 15:30 local time on Wednesday.
South Korea has proposed high-level talks to Pyongyang after the North's leader Kim Jong-un called for a breakthrough in relations. North Korea suggested inter-Korea dialogue and said that the country might attend the Winter Olympics in the South in February. South Korea has proposed a meeting next Tuesday in the border town of Panmunjom. China has welcomed the possibility of the first high-level talks between the two since 2015.
The Chinese government welcomes and supports the two sides in taking advantage of this opportunity and make concrete efforts to improve bilateral ties, alleviate the situation on the peninsula, and realize the denuclearization of the peninsula.
Toxic water and dust are endangering the lives of tens of thousands of South Africans living in the Soweto township of Johannesburg. More than a century of gold mining has left piles of bleached mine waste throughout Johannesburg's landscape. There are more than 200 mining dumps within 6 billion tons of waste containing toxic substances like arsenic, lead, and uranium. According to researchers, there are 2 million people at risk because of the toxic waste.
The highest levels of lead in the blood of the children who live within 500 meters of the mine tailings dumps, and much lower levels if they live 2 or 3 kilometers away.
We clean 4 times, 5 times a day. Sometimes we don't even clean. We sleep there, and then we inhale that thing. It kills us.
In an attempt to battle old age with exercise, grannies in Johannesburg have chosen boxing to keep themselves healthy. Popularly known as the boxing grannies, aged between 75 to 80 years old, these grannies box to fight the aches and pains of old age and to keep fit. They do 2 sessions a week that include cardio and boxing exercises like sparring and hitting the punching bag. They have also inspired younger people to get serious about fitness from an earlier age.
Grannies like me is that they should leave the old way of telling themselves that they are old and they are grannies and to try their best. Just because you are a granny does not mean you need to burden yourself with that word granny. You need to wake yourself up and show that you are a granny with life.
They're taking care of their grandchildren, cleaning the house, some of them. So most of them we thought that boxing is the one that will also make them relax, make them think, make them young again.
Those boxing grannies are so cute. And creativity and technology are joining forces in Mexico to fight pollution. In the next report, we look at the case of Diego Cardenas, a young man who decided to make bicycles out of bamboo.
Mexico City is one of the most polluted in Latin America. The high number of cars means that the citizens spend up to 2 hours a day in traffic. Mexicans are increasingly looking for an ecological transportation system, like the bicycle. But Diego goes further, using bamboo instead of the traditional materials.
Es como romper un paradigma que existe en la modernidad, ¿no?
It is like breaking a paradigm that exists nowadays. This feeling to resolve everything with metal materials that may last thousands of years. But it's best to use a material that can last a lifetime, if it's taken care of properly. For something like a bike and without exploiting the mind.
In his workshop, natural fibers combine with high technology to make truly unique machines.
Buscamos no domar la naturaleza.
We seek to take the best of nature, to take advantage of it and transform it, to make it useful and to not damage the environment.
In addition to caring for their environment, the products of this workshop are characterized by their aesthetics and functionality, although many people are surprised to learn what material they are made of.
The first thing that they ask is if they are resistant. Many doubt that bamboo can last as long as we say. They also ask if it requires special care. They even ask if they need water or things like that.
However, this belief usually doesn't last long, as it happened to Olga when she rode her bike for the first time almost a year ago.
Es el mejor diseño que he encontrado. Siempre he sido.
It's the best design that I have found. I have always used bicycles and I have had many different models. When I tried this bicycle, it fulfilled all my expectations.
It is calculated that the number of people using bicycles in Mexico City has doubled in the last 10 years. Some estimates suggest that it transports almost 500,000 citizens daily.
Also in Mexico, the remains of centuries-old Dutch and British ships have been discovered off the country's Caribbean coast. A team of archaeologists have been examining the wrecks of an 18th century Dutch warship and a 19th century British steamboat, as well as an old lighthouse. They were found 2 miles from the coast near the small seaport town of Sisal in the Yucatan Peninsula. And we've come to the end of this morning's news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesiotv.net/English. And you can join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesio English, I'm Sony Gray. Thank you so much for watching.